Now we can start Jack and Rory. Or listen with mother, is it? Listen with father. Oh,
how are you showing your age?
the home service. There you go. Right, now then. Thanks to everybody that took the time and made the effort to send in questions. I'm not going to address them specifically individually, but I've put a presentation together which I think covers all of them. If you have any questions or you feel that you've been shortchanged, ask me at the end. I've got, can't remember now, what were you saying about memory a minute ago? I've got 33 slides to go through. So we've still got people arriving. What is it so difficult about 2 o'clock? My old business, you were there on the dot or you were on the helicopter, take your pick. Right. Share screen, I guess, is the next thing, which would be this one. And we want to go to that one, not that one, back one. Okay, so questions and answers. Thanks to everybody that sent in questions. Some were really good. Some, frankly, could have been answered with a 2-minute Google, but there we go. We'll try and cover the lot. So, I was reminded of this morning because I saw somebody, bless them, had spent a great deal of time and effort putting together an app to advise when you should do your next inspection. And quite frankly, he did not have a happy time of it. He got told it was not really required. I kept my fingers to myself, but I would agree with the sentiment. So tech at the bees, in other words, your smartphone. Yes, it's great. Source of all information and of course, 100% reliable. Really? Now, you absolutely sure about this? Are you 100% sure? Because I am not. I was, as part of this, I was researching mouse guards. And to my astonishment, there is a role-playing game called Mouse Guard, would you believe? And I found myself in the middle of all sorts of weird situations. And I came across a website where I was being shown how to make a DIY mouse guard using 1/2-inch mesh, right? So they were saying, cut the bottom strip off the mesh so you leave the legs sticking down with a 1/2-inch gap in between. Do we think this would be a good or a bad idea? We don't know. Right, clue. 1/2 inch is 12.5 millimeters, right? Give or take. And a mouse guard is set at 8 millimeters. So you're giving your mousey 4.5 mil extra to play with. In other words, in mouse terminology, an open goal. You might as well leave the front door wide open and whistle, come on, free meal. Utter nonsense, total stupidity, but there it is on the web. It is obviously 100% right. Not. So be very, very dubious about stuff you read. And if it clangs with what you think you know is right, either consult a book or Google further or ask on a reputable Facebook group, but cross-check. Don't take things at face value, especially when they appear to differ significantly from what you think is right. Trust your instincts. Now, the other problem with tech is it's expensive and it's liable to get mucked up with propolis. If you get propolis on your smartphone that's cost you several £100s, you ain't going to be a happy bunny. So the thing I would say in favor of tech, though, is you have a lifeline, which back in the day we didn't have. So if you get stung, you start to feel ill, use your phone and call for help. The emergency services would far rather it was a genuine false alarm than somebody who's on death's door and costs an absolute fortune to put right. Just stands to reason. Talking about doing silly things, and I'll get to the washing in a minute. Yours truly went to look at the apiary yesterday because the day before I had sheep had broken through the fence in amongst the hives because the farmer had left them really in the field a day too long. The field was quite literally turning black, lack of grass in the back of the fence, in amongst the hives. Obviously, they hadn't been able to get to it, so there was some lovely grass, and they decided they wanted their share. So that was okay. I shooed the sheep out, shut the gate, no harm done. But yesterday when I went down, the sheep had been moved, but they'd obviously been back in amongst the hives, and a nucleus box had been knocked over. It was lying on its side. So without thinking, I bent down, I set it straight, and I got stung on my ankle. Well, you know, I've been stung thousands of times, so what? Well, I'll tell you something, people, this was the most painful sting I think I've ever had. I went to bed at midnight last night. I was dosed up with antihistamine. I'd put antihistamine cream on it. It was swollen to about the size of a diameter of, oh, I don't know, 4 inches, maybe 5 inches. It was swollen. It was hot. It was extremely tender. Went to bed, couldn't sleep. Lay, didn't matter how I lay, I seemed to be pressing on it. 1:30, I got up to go to the loo and I thought, stuff it. So I took another 2 antihistamines. I took 2 paracetamols, and the next thing I knew, it was 7 o'clock in the morning, which was fine. And it is still tender yet. So be careful. The stupidity of it is I was wearing fluffy black socks, which the wife bought me, bless her, to round up an order to get free postage the way you do. They're lovely socks. They're ever so nice and cozy. But bees don't like fluffy black socks. They really don't. And what I really should have done is said, well, okay, the nuke has been tipped over. I will go home. I will put on my bee boots and go back down and sort it. But no, I would take the shortcut. Anyway, this is my back garden at about 11:30 or so this morning. This is my boundary wall here, and this is the sheep paddocks at the back, which are currently unoccupied because the sheepies are inside being fed up, ready for the start of the lambing. About 3 weeks' time, this will be filled with ewes and lambs, and it'll get noisy because Mrs. Sheep always seems to want to know where her lambs are when she goes bah, and they go bah, and on it goes. Right. The point I'm trying to make, or not as yet, but you can see the crocus, and the crocus actually extends over to the left. There were 1,000 bulbs we put in because somebody asked, is it worth planting? And the answer is, like most beekeeping questions, yes and no. I've been quite disappointed up until today that we've had no bee activity whatsoever, but we are at the west end of the village, which means the bees are flying into the prevailing wind to get to us. But today, I'm happy to report we have got action, and we've had as many as 7 bees working the crocus. And those 7, obviously, if you remember your film from last week, will be telling the others where the action is, and they will come back to it. David, I'm not taking questions until the end, sir. So that is the upside of having crocus. The downside, or sorry, the upside of planting. The downside is, you'll see the maths in a wee while. It's relatively insignificant in the overall scheme of things. And of course, the other thing about the bees coming to my patch of crocus is they have to fly past an awful lot of other people's snowdrops and crocus to get to my back garden. So they're quite possibly gorging themselves just down the road. And here's proof of the pudding. Here she is, busy, busy, busy. These big purple crocus are fantastic, huge amounts of pollen on them. And you can see from our pollen basket there, boy, is she taking advantage, bless her. An absolute delight to see, and to hear the hum of the wings in the garden. Yeah, that's nice. So as I've put up on the group, I know some of you might have seen it on Facebook, this is the circle completing itself. We've gone through the winter. We're collecting pollen, which means that the colony that bee is flying back to is more than likely queen right and has brood. And this is today, 27th of February, is the start of my 22 beekeeping season. Can't wait, rock on. Now, a plant I totally forgot to mention, as soon as we're talking about plants, is the flowering currant. What's so special about the flowering currant? Traditionally, it's the indicator that it is now warm enough to start thinking about opening up hives. Bear in mind, if it is freezing cold, there's a hurling gale from the north and it's -16, I don't care if the flowering currant's in flower or not, it is not time to be opening hives. If it is +12, there's hardly a breeze and the sun is shining and the flowering currant smells delicious, which it does in the warmth, then yes, it is the right time to be starting to look. So it is a useful indicator, so keep an eye out for it. Something I think I forgot to mention was mouse guards, and having condemned people for saying ½ an inch is a mouse guard. When you're putting your hives down for winter, you want to have a hive that's not leaking. You want to have a nice, dry and safe environment for the bees. And by safe, I mean it's not going to be knocked over by rampant sheep like my nuke was. And you want to have a mouse guard on the front because the little so-and-sos will do a great deal of damage. In actual fact, if they are not careful, they get stung to death and the bees will actually propolize them up. I've seen it more than once. Not in hives, I hasten to add, that mice have got into of mine, but hives I bought in the past, opened up and found an entombed body in there. Talking about mice, they are an absolute nightmare. I was starting to move some stuff around in my garage 5 days ago, and out the corner of my left eye, I thought something moved. And I looked at my mouse traps and they were empty of bait. I thought, oh, well, I'll just reset and see what happens. 2 mice, 2 mice, 2 mice, 3 mice, and then the last 2 nights, nothing. So don't neglect your mouse traps because the little so-and-sos will make absolute hay, and it won't be at their expense, it'll be yours. This is the classic mouse guard here. It's very, very thin. It's either tin plate or aluminium, probably tin plate, I think. 8mm holes, Moosey can't get through. This is a much heavier duty one. It's got the narrow bit at the top to fit a nuke, which obviously would sit that way down, or it's got more or less a full entrance, which is almost like a saw blade, but it's 8mm gaps. So that's mouse guards. And what kind of a site do you want for winter? Well, a lot of you will be thinking, well, it's going to be the garden. Fair enough. My site has, first and foremost, it's got good air drainage. Now, by air drainage, you're probably aware that cold air flows downhill. And if you look at some of the pictures of vineyards in the colder parts of France, you will see they've got a herringbone pattern of hedges. And the reason for this herringbone pattern of hedge is the cold air flows down, then it's intersected by another, and it flows that way, and then down and down and down till it's got rid of. My bees are at the foot of a hill, and the water flows down that hill. The field, this is a hill, a slope. The water flows down and it drains out partially through the bottom corner next to the bees. And I'm not bothered about that because it drains. And also, if the water is draining out there, the cold air is draining out there. Yesterday, when I went down to check them, there is a stand of trees round the little sewage works for the village. And I was interested to see, with the westering sun, this was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the westering sun, the trees were throwing a shadow across the grass, but it wasn't touching the bees. The bees' hives were actually sitting in afternoon sun, 4 o'clock February. So that's the kind of location you're looking for. You want good air drainage, you want shelter. Mine are lined up to face sort of southy westy, if you like, depending how each hive is actually individually orientated. So they are lined up to get the maximum sunlight. Air drainage, though, in the winter is very important, and it's something a lot of people overlook. Now, I was asked about what poly. I like the Swinty. I know it only takes the 10 frames, which inverted commas is a drawback. The problem with a lot of the poly is that most of the beekeepers, the vast majority of beekeepers in the UK are amateurs. And they've all got their pet theory about what is the best quality to have in a hive. And along comes the manufacturer and they say, right, we're going to make a poly hive. Now, bear in mind, the mold for each of the bits of the poly is about 40,000 quid, right? So once you make your mind up and make them, you ain't going to be changing your mind in the next 10 minutes. That's not a happening, as Mr. Beats would say. So along comes the amateur and they say, oh, we don't like that entrance. It's far too narrow. The bees can't ventilate. Oh, dear me, no, won't do, won't do. I'm not going to buy your hive unless you make it a proper national entrance, full width. Right. So the manufacturer says, well, okay, I'm umpteen tens of thousands of pounds down on buying my molds. I want to sell these hives. So I'll modify and I'll make a nice big entrance because this is what the customer wants. The customer's always right, yeah? Yeah, right. So instead of designing in a mouse guard by having an 8mm slot, which the Swinty has got, they designed it out. Now, where's the common sense in that? And there's one particular manufacturer compounded it, and I'm naming no names, but you'll see for yourselves down the line. Across the front of the brood box, there's 3 vertical flats, right? Middle and the 2 ends. And in between, it's dished, it's scalloped. And there's a thundering great big deep entrance. Now you tell me how to fit a mouse guard to that, because I'm damned if I can work it out. Utter stupidity. avoidable. You don't engineer problems in, you engineer them out. That's the whole point of engineering. Anyway, rant over. So 20 takes 10 frames, 1 frame less, well, okay. I run double brood boxes. Frankly, my dear, I don't care because I get between 16 and 18 frames of brood. And that is more than enough to keep my queens going, and I have nice strong colonies. And besides that, foundation comes in packs of 10, which is a bit handy. Mouse-proof entrance, well, I've just had a go at that one. Yes, the Swinty needs assembling. I actually made a video on how to assemble a brood box, donkey's years ago now, when poly was a lot rarer than it is now. It takes about 3 minutes to put together. You know, it's not exactly a rocket science. Yes, it needs painting, but then again, you can pick the color of your choice. You're not stuck to blue or yellow. Talking of painting, when you're painting beehives, whether they are timber or they are poly, you only paint the outside. And with poly especially, do not paint the edges of the boxes because they are load-bearing surfaces. And if you get 60 or 80 or 150 pounds of honey on top pressing down, you will make them very difficult to separate, which is not the point. And remember, you do not paint on the inside because the bees will paint that with propolis to sterilize the hive anyway. So you're making their lives more difficult and you're wasting your time and your money. Where should I buy my bees? Well, that is a very good question. It's entirely up to you. Everybody says on the various forums when this question gets asked, buy local, local bees are best. Well, how local's local? If you plunked us into, say, Texas, right, you could be growing another 1,000 miles and getting bees. They're still local to Texas. You know, it's scale. Yes, local bees are acclimatized to the climate. Okay. The carniolans that I've been using, especially in the earlier days, they came directly in from the continent. They were almost alpine bees. So the climate here probably was suitable in terms of temperature, but it certainly wasn't the same as in terms of daylight hours. And they do very, very well. So local is a word that's a bit weaselly, you know, you can twist it to suit. Or should you buy quality? I think personally you buy quality and then work around that, because local and quality are not synonymous by a very long chalk. Just keep that in mind. A lot of local bees will be pure mongrels. They won't breed pure, although as an amateur, we are not able to breed bees at all. And as for purity, that's not a starter unless you're practicing artificial insemination, which can be done, by the way. It can be done with bees, is done with bees, but it's a whole scenario of its own. And then there's always the fear of buying something that is nasty. Now, this is another interesting one. Nasty can be a very weaselly word. Ah, my pretty kittens, your horrors. How many stings does it take to define a colony that is nasty? Now, for me, it could be several hundred. For you, it could be 2. But I'm a realist, and people who are just starting out tend to be a little bit theoretical. Let's be kind. So you need to think to yourself, what is reasonable and what's not. bear in mind that it's the same as somebody coming along, taking the roof off your house and moving your furniture around. You ain't going to be too pleased. You know, you're going to reach for the nearest hard, big object or kitchen knife and say, you know, get off, hate you, sting. Natural reaction, your property. Who's this giant that's taking the roof off? You will get defensive. Human nature. If you're a bee and you've got a handy weapon in your tail, what are you going to do? So this has to be thought about in a reasonable manner. I have days I work 20 colonies and I don't get a sting, but that's weather. And the bees have got a nice nectar flow coming in. They're happy. They're humming away. And, you know, you can do virtually anything you like on a day like that. They won't fuss. But mess them about in the wrong weather conditions and you'll very rapidly find out they are defensive. So if you're getting pinged on the veil at 50 yards when you get out the car, or you start to walk down the garden towards the hive, that is too defensive. If you're going out and hanging out the washing and you have to put on a veil, or you need to put on a veil to cut the grass, again, I think you need to have a think about what's what. People say, yes, you can requeen, but they'll say, but remember, it's 21 days from the egg, and it's a further 21 days until that bee is out. That's 42 days that you'll have to put up with it. Rubbish. I've seen a colony change temperament completely in 24 hours. Now ask yourself why. And you know the answer. I've told you times. Think cake. What comprises the cake? Queen pheromone. Nasty queen had pheromone A, she's gone. New queen has got pheromone B. All of a sudden, that new pheromone is getting spread around the colony, and there's a massive wave of, chillax. Everything's lovely. There you go, 24 hours. So requeening can be extremely beneficial, but do buy from somebody who's reputable, not just somebody that happens to have a spare queen. If you're paying out the money, you might as well get something decent. Now then, one or two colonies, that is. Classically, the answer is you always want to have two. And the reason for it is if something goes wrong, for a start, you've got a test frame available to use to check whether you are actually queenless or not. And if all else fails, you can always unite the two together and then take a split off down the line, buy a queen, and you're back to your two. It's an insurance. Yes, it's more money, but do bear in mind, and we'll cover this down the line, you can take your second one off your first one at no real cost to you apart from the hive. Uniting can be done using newspaper or an aerosol spray. Now, the classic newspaper method is 2 sheets of newspaper spread across the box that you want to unite. You put the other box on top, you prick the newspaper in a couple of places with the corner of your hive tool so that the bee's mandibles or mouth parts can get a grip on the tear and start to open it out. If you don't give them that start, it's quite difficult for them to actually get through the paper because it's smooth and could be quite tight the way of depending on how you've stretched it. So Newspaper is the traditional way of doing it. Murray McGregor says you don't need to bother with that. He unites thousands of colonies a year through the way that he works his colonies, and he uses a room freshener aerosol spray, and he says that the particular smell seems to have no difference whatsoever. The point is it masks the smell of the queen's pheromone, so enabling the two lots to have the same smell, because he puts a squirt down from the top into the box below. He puts another squirt into the one above. They both smell of room freshener, and by the time they ventilate and get everything sorted out, the queen pheromone is starting to circulate round, and that's it. Job done. Now then, out apiaries. What is required in an out apiary? Well, the first thing I would look for is water. And the second thing I would look for is shelter. And one of the indicators of shelter on the moors, for example, if for most people an out apiary is a heather site, is bracken. If bracken's growing, you're in the lee. The other thing you need to consider is a hive obviously has a weight. How far are you willing to push, carry, move that weight? I can't make that decision for you. That's entirely up to you. I know what I used to be able to do. I know what I now can do. I've got another operation looming, so I'm liable to lose part of the use of my other hand. So my options are becoming more limited, and I have to accept that. That's just the way it is. Now, I've seen people saying, can somebody help me find an out apiary? And I think, frankly, that's pathetic. The answer is no. The only person that's going to know whether that spot is suitable for what they want is themselves, because I don't know what they're capable of doing. I don't know what they're capable or even what they know. And as I mentioned before, going to a landowner and saying, can I put some bees on your 50,000 acre estate? And they're going to think, hang on, is he going to put them next to the shooting butt, or worse, in the lee of a shooting butt? Are they going to put them next to that spot where everybody has their picnic? You know, there's all sorts of issues that you might not even think about, might not even cross my mind, but it's at the forefront of the landowner's mind. Find where you want to go. Think, is it suitable for all my requirements? Then go and find the landowner, which in itself could be a trick. And you might have to ask several local farmers, local residents, to find out who actually owns the ground. Go to the landowner and say, can I put my bees there? Because no is a very easy word to say. It's a lot easier than saying yes. But if you minimize the options of saying no, you increase equally the chances they'll say yes. I've only been refused, I think, 3 times. And of those 3, 2 had perfectly good reasons. And the third one, to be brutally honest, I don't think he understood the question. So there we go. Water, shelter, forage. Now, the big one there is the forage. And the only way to find out if a location is going to work for you is to put bees on it and be prepared to move them. As in, you know, rescue them and take them somewhere else. As Manley said, the only way to find out what a site will produce is to put bees on it. It's that simple. It's always a gamble. You never know. And sometimes it pays off in spades, and sometimes it's a disaster. The bees will let you know. Casualties. Will you crush a bee when working hives? Yes. Sad but true, but yes, there will be casualties. It's just a fact of life. What you need to bear in mind is the honey bee colony is an organism, and it's an organism comprised, the same as us, of lots and lots and lots of cells, each cell being a bee. You will lose some. It's just a fact of beekeeping. But remember, when you crush a bee, if there is eczema inside it, you are going to spread that eczema around. So you really want to try and minimize the spread as much as possible. One of the big problems with the National Hive design, it is BBS, bottom bee space. In other words, the frames are flush with the top edge of the box, right? So if the Kindle is the side wall of the hive, the top bars, let's do it that way, are there. Right? There is no space above the top bar. The space is down below, the bee space. So one of the reasons that the Langstroth is a popular commercial hive is it is top bee space, and it is a lot faster to put supers back on a top bee space hive without crushing bees than it is to put them back on top of a bottom bee space hive, because you've got all your top bars are covered in bees. So you have to smoke them down or waft them down with a nasty smell. It's just slower. But casualties, yes, you just have to accept that, but try your damnedest to minimize them. And that doesn't mean to say taking half an hour to put the boxes back together again, because the time is doing more damage than actually losing one bee. When do you feed, and what do you feed with? That all depends on the time of year. Just check me time. If you are wanting to G the bees up a bit in the spring stimulation, you feed 1-to-1, and that is 1 pint to 1 pound of sugar, or a pound of sugar to a pint of water, 1-to-1. And if you are feeding to give them a boost, you want to be feeding no more than about half a pint a week, right? Any more than that, and they're liable to start storing it. And you don't want that. You want your brood combs nice and free of stores to get as much brood as possible in them. And you certainly don't want sugar being stored up in your supers, because that's contaminating your honey. So, emergency feeding during the season, if you have a severe dearth because of really bad cold weather, it might pay you to feed a little bit. And again, it is 1-to-1. That is 1 pound to 1 pint, or 1 pint to 1 pound of sugar. Autumn feeding, can't spell, missed out an E, sorry. Autumn feeding for your stores is 2-to-1. And that's not 2 pints to a pound, it is 2 pounds to a pint, or 2 kilos to a litre. If you're feeding fondant, the fondant you want is Baker's white icing fondant, and it is fed on top of the top bars. Commercial syrups save you the mixing effort, and the invert syrup reputedly stops or inhibits robbing. Robbing. Our little furry darlings are thieves at heart. Little horrors, oh yes they are. They will steal if they can get away with it. And when it gets really nasty, it's called robbing. And they will actually rob another colony to death, to the point that the colony says, I can't cope with this, and they just leave. So it is not to be encouraged. If you have a colony that you think is being robbed, reduce the entrance way down to 1 B-way, so 8 millimeters. Another thing you can do is move the victim to another site, or you can switch the victim and the aggressor, which also confuses them. Don't spill syrup if you can avoid it in the apiary, because that will stimulate robbing. And offering dirty equipment to be cleaned up in your apiary is a very bad idea. It could be disastrous. Cappings. Cappings are problematical for a lot of people because they don't have the equipment to press them or spin them. What you can do with cappings on a smallish scale is to have a top feeder like a Miller feeder or an Ashworth feeder, put the cappings in there and allow the bees access to it. And that's confining the cappings to the top of one colony. Or if you've got a lot of cappings, you might have to use several colonies. But you are saying to the bees, and the bees will treat the cappings as theirs. And you've also made them steal proof from other colonies, right? Another thing that can be done, although it is enormously frowned upon by the vast majority of beekeepers, who of course have never actually tried to do it, is feed outside at the same time as you are feeding your colonies for winter. Now, let's say you are a worker bee and you have larceny on your mind. You've got your mask over your eyes, you've got your little stick with your spotted hanky, and you're flying out to have a mosey around the apiary and see who you can pick on, right? Oh, hang on a minute. Oh, here's a feeder full of syrup and nobody's guarding it. It's open house. So you land, you unfurl your little spotted handkerchief, you go scoop, tie it up, home you go. Hey guys, I've just found some free syrup. And of course, everybody learns, everybody knows where to go. When I was at Cranston and I was feeding upwards of 60 colonies at a time, and I used to feed enormous amounts of syrup because we took quite a lot of heather honey out the brood boxes. Two things happened. One was that the feed stimulation, because some of these colonies would take down, and I'm not joking here, 2 gallons overnight, no bother. We would give them empty comb and a mix of foundation. The foundation would get drawn out, the empty comb would be revitalized, and we would get 3 or 4 frames of brood in late October. When I say we, this is my then wife and I. And we also fed heavily outside. And the bees would watch for us filling the feeder in the morning. And I would go across with 5-gallon drums, half full of syrup. The reason they were half full is you fill a full 5-gallon drum with 2-to-1 syrup, you'll give yourself a hernia. So take across these drums, fill up the feeders, and all of a sudden, whoosh, thousands of bees would come and start feeding. And the reason people say this is a terrible idea, and it is to a point true, is there is a serious risk of a cross-infecting disease. However, If you are in an isolated location, which I was, it was safe because the only bees that were in that area were mine. If you're confident, a little bit of outside feeding will stop robbing. Why steal when you can take for free? But as I say, there is a disease risk. Now then, where should feed be was another good question. And I'm sorry, actually, it even had to be asked. I thought I'd made this very clear, but obviously I failed. So my fault. If you are feeding with the porterholes open on top of the crown board and the temperature drops, and I don't know if anybody watched the winter of '63 that was on the other night. I don't actually personally have memories of that winter, but we had in the UK the best part of 10 weeks of sub-zero temperatures. The climate that should have been sitting on top of Siberia chose instead to sit on top of the UK. British Rail were profoundly embarrassed because their bonny new diesel engines were absolutely hopeless, and they had to pull the old steam engines out of the sheds and fire them up and get them going again. Anyway, so we can get pretty serious weather in the UK. If you are feeding over the crown board and the temperature plummets, that food might as well be on the moon. It's inaccessible. You want the food, especially fondant, to be directly on top of the top bars, and you want it right across the colony so that regardless of where the cluster moves to, that fondant is above them and accessible. And to that end, I make shallow eeks, as I explained, about 1 inch deep and 1 inch of fondant about yay wide, yay deep, right across, is about 2 kilos. And you'll hear people say, oh, but it drips down. Well, it does if the colony dies, I agree. But if the colony is thriving, you won't have a problem with fondant dripping. None of it's proper fondant. And you will also find that bees in poly tend not to cluster anything like as tightly as bees in timber. Having said that, and given the time of year we're at right now, I was shocked the first year that I had a reasonable number of polyhives, because in the middle of March, I came back from offshore full of the joys of spring, ready to start the beekeeping season, started looking inside colonies, and every poly colony I had was queenless. Not a cell of brood to be seen. Disaster. Every one of the wooden hives had 2 or 3 good patches of brood. Hey, success. And then I sat down and I thought about it. And I thought, well, it's the same bees. If anything, the colonies in the poly are stronger than the colonies in the timber. So why has the timber got brood and the poly doesn't? They can't all be queenless. I mean, just the law of averages says that's impossible. And the penny finally dropped, because about 3 weeks later, the poly had more brood than the timber, and they were taken off like they were on fire. It's all down to water. In the timber, the bees are a bit colder, the atmosphere is damper, and they dry out the atmosphere by generating brood food and feeding it to larvae, and they stimulate the queen to lay the eggs to act as a water absorber. No need for that to happen in the poly because the atmosphere is drier. So which colony is under more stress? Which of the old codgers who are at the end of their working lives are under more pressure? I think you can work that one out. Planting. Well, I kind of covered this right at the beginning, but is it worth planting up? In some ways, yes. I mean, I can't remember what I spent on my crocus bulbs. I don't think it was a stretch of 100 quid, possibly a fairly bit less than that. Took about 3 hours to plant between the two of us. Was it worth the time in the wallet for the pleasure I got this afternoon and the pleasure, or this morning rather, and the pleasure that the wife got this morning? Yes. Yes, it is. For spring garden, yes. However, oh, hang on. Is it worth planting hundreds of acres to supply your bees? No. It would break your bank. Now, our old friend Varroa again. Treating Varroa. Basically, it's something you're going to have to do. It's virtually unavoidable. There are people who will swear blind that they're not treating, but they also seem to be quite reluctant to tell you how many colonies that they're having to replace. More power to their elbow. I hope they are successful, but I think of treating Varroa as routine insurance. If you don't do it, you lose the bees pretty much effectively. Every so often, somebody will turn up, especially on social media, and they will shout Eureka and tell you they have got the latest and greatest thing for Varroa. They are lying through their back teeth before they even try and sell you. You can safely say it's rubbish. I'm willing to be proven wrong, but as things stand, it's rubbish. There are only, I believe, 3 products that I know of that are legal in the UK, and you have to keep a record of the usage thereof. There is a lot of oxalic acid purchased by beekeepers in the UK, and I hope you can detect irony when you hear it, because there's a hell of a lot of cleaning of timber hives being carried out using oxalic acid, especially by polyhive owners. If you get me drift, wink, wink, wink. Because this is going out on YouTube, I cannot, in all honesty, say that I can't tell you to do something that is wrong. You know, I'm not going to tell you to go and rob the bank, because that could be construed by the legal authorities as encouraging you to commit a crime. Same goes for the use of oxalic. The reality is it is widely used to treat Varroa. And the reason is very simple. The official chemicals and drugs have gone through a vetting process, and that vetting process costs a lot of money. And they have a license from the UK government which says this product used in this way is safe. Whereas other stuff that you buy from wood treatment companies or whoever has not gone through the vetting process. It might be just as effective, if not more effective, but that's beside the point. It's not licensed. Now, there's other ways of dealing with Varroa, one of which is sacrificial brood. This is where you give the Varroa the opportunity to use a frame of brood, and once it's capped, you then take it away and give it to your hens for hen food, or just destroy it. And hopefully you remove a substantial chunk of your Varroa population with it. Now, The person that asked the question mentioned worker brood. It's not worker brood it's used for this. It is drone brood, because drone brood is more attractive to Varroa, to the female mites, by a factor of 8 to 1. That's why it's drone brood that is used. And the reason it's more attractive is the Varroa instinctively seem to know, which is quite astonishing actually when you bear in mind they jumped from a different species of bee to the European bees. So they came from Apis cerana, the Middle Eastern bee. But anyway, they seem to know instinctively that they get this extra 3 days under the cappings, and therefore drone brood is the brood of choice. So that's sacrificial removal. It doesn't do any harm, but it is not a cure. All you are doing is reducing the population. Also bear in mind, you don't want to take all the drone brood out of a colony, because the bees want drones. It's their insurance policy in case something nasty happens to the queen. Excuse me a minute, I need lubrication. So, there is also IPM, Integrated Pest Management. And this is, again, a way of trying to minimize Varroa. It includes the drone brood. It includes using sifting caster sugar across, various other tricks. I'm not going into it in depth. Look it up. In my opinion, it's used by idealists who are traveling more in hope than in knowledge, and they don't want to hurt the bees by treating for Varroa in a nasty way, using hard chemicals as opposed to what they call soft chemicals. It's a bit like the lady I saw the other day who was going on at great length about how organic had no chemicals in it. I thought, really? So I've also asked about vaping. There are a couple of treatments in the UK which are licensed, and what is vaping is the first question. Vaping is putting a substance onto a hot surface so that the chemical is turned into a vapor, and the vapor is introduced into the hive of bees with a view to stunning or killing the Varroa population. The chemicals that are here are the ones that are legal. Nothing else is. So Apivar strips, this is not vaping, these are contact strips, and the active chemical is amitraz. The strips go in for about 6 weeks. The bees walk across it, they get the stuff, the active ingredient into their bodies, and the Varroa, by sucking the hemolymph, get it into their bodies, and it doesn't do them any good. Apibioxiol can be used for vaping, and it can also be used for oxalic trickle. An oxalic trickle is, dare I say it, a very effective treatment where you mix up some syrup and the licensed chemical. Of course, you wouldn't use oxalic acid per se. No, 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 no. You would use the official chemical, and you give 5 mL of the syrup per seam of bees round about Christmas. A little Chrissy Prissy for the colony. So if there are 5 seams of bees, you need 25 mL, and if there are 8 seams of bees, you need 40 mL. It's very easy to do, and because the bees are tight clustered, you can quite often do it without even wearing a veil. And there's another one, AP Life Var is the chemical of choice, or the mix of choice for the organic leaning people. It's got no oxalic in it. It depends on essential oils. How effective it is, I'll be brutally honest, I haven't got a clue. Not a clue. And I'm so interested, I'm not even bothered to look it up because I just don't see the efficiency of it. So they are all there, and Google is your friend. Queen replacement. Should queens be replaced every year? No. No need. Provided the queen is laying and she's performing and you've got a nice brood pattern, which is to say you ain't got hoppity skip, hoppity skip, hoppity skip, you know, every third cell's empty. If you've got a nice solid brood pattern and the colony temperament is good, everything is as you would hope for, why bother? She's getting on with it. She's doing a good job. So what qualities are you looking for? You want her to be prolific. You want the bees to be quiet on the comb. You want the bees to be calm, and you want the bees to be productive. I think that just about sums it up. Why quiet on the comb? Well, if you are queen hunting seriously for, say, incipient swarming, and the bees run into the corners of the comb and they form clumps, and the clumps then fall off the bottom of the bottom bars, how on earth are you going to find a queen? And you get bees with these characteristics, runny bees, and they are a complete pain because, as I say, queen hunting, absolute nightmare. So you want them to sit on the comb. Obviously, you want productivity. And this is where it helps if you've got a baseline. With one colony, it's very difficult to know if that colony is performing up to anything like a standard or not. If you've only got the one, you can cross-reference, obviously, by saying to people online, is this the same as how you're managing? If you're in Dornoch and the respondent is in darkest Devon, I don't think there's actually much correlation between the two. So you've got to keep a mindset of, is your information comparable to or useful to my situation? And if you're in Orkney and the respondent is in Kent, the answer is no. If you're in Orkney and your respondent is in Caithness, I think you've got validity. So you need to bear in mind at all times location, 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 and location. Prolific queens are lovely, provided they don't want to go into swarm mode. They can be almost too strong for their own good. To be prolific, you need forage. Now, this is where the planting business comes into a bit of focus. If you say that your bee is going to fly, roughly speaking, underneath a mile, which is, I think, reasonably realistic. There's been research that says, in actual fact, if at all possible, they try and forage within 500 meters. But anyway, let's say it's the 1500 meters, which is roughly speaking a mile. If you work the calculations, that comes out at 1,767,146 square meters. If you're going to spend 50 pence on planting that lot, that's the best part of £750,000. I rest my case, Your Honour. It's expensive. Even 500 meters, you work your 2 pi r and you get 196,350 square meters. Again, 50 pence, you're talking serious cash. In actual fact, no need. If you're in a reasonable location, and you have a reasonable forage source, the bees will manage perfectly well. But the only way to find out is do a Manley and stick some bees on the area. And talking about Manley, if I've got this in the right order, no, I ain't. Manley also said, no, hang on, I'll stop myself there because I know I've got a slide further down the line. I was asked about honey being kosher and halal. And the answer is yes, with provisos. Not a market I've ever had anything to do with, so I have no expertise on it. But from the very brief look I had yesterday, there are certain rules and hoops that have to be jumped through before you can use the terminology on your labels. And coming back to our friend, the label, and using the word organic, you can use the word on a label, but you'd better be able to back it up in a court of law, because a label is a legal statement and it has to be right. If you have a doubt as to whether the ground that the bees are flying over is or isn't organic, you'd better not use the word, because with the trace testing that they can do these days, if you've got half a foot over the line, they'll drive a nail through it. Be warned. Also asked about honey price. Now, this is the chestnut of all chestnuts. You've got cold way and warm way, you've got honey price, you've got top bee space and bottom bee space. Nowadays, you've got timber against poly, but the king of a lot is the honey price. 3 years ago, I parked up in Hoyk, in the Common Hugh car park, and there was an old manny there with a little stall, and he was selling honey at £3 a pound jar. His choice. I suggested to him that he was possibly a little bit on the low side, and he said, no. I said, I've been selling at this price for years. It sells away at this price. There's nothing wrong with my price. I thought, well, no wonder it's selling at that price. So I sell at £6 for 12 ounces or £8 a pound. And people are happy to pay it. Now, when my wife and I started looking for our guest house, which was now 13 years ago, we went to a village in Wales, and in this village there was a honey shop which was owned by the local bee farm. And they were selling a pound of honey, liquid honey, blossom, not even heather, blossom, £14.95. 14 years ago. So there you go. If you're in the right area, the sky's the limit. I dare say if you were selling honey into Harrods or what have you in London, you'd probably be able to get £20 a pound. But those sort of prices are only achievable to the very few. In general, I think £8 to £10 a pound is probably about the right mark. And I sell mine into shops at £6 a 12 ounces. They put whatever markup they like on it. To be honest, I haven't even looked to see what they're charging. And I charge at the door the same because it's folk in the locality and my bees are working their gardens. It's only reasonable. So that's the honey price. Colony density. And Manley said it's very simple. You keep adding hives to the apiary until the average take starts to fall. And if you want to get really picky about this, you would be saying that would be a kind of a 10-year average. So if the last year you got 50 pounds a hive, and this year the weather was just as good as last year, and you had another 10 hives, and it went down to 40 pounds, well, you've gone past the tipping point. Back off. Keep it simple, silly. It's just simple maths. There is X amount of nectar available in the area. You've got Y number of bees, etc. It's just basic. But there comes a point where it goes into reverse. Making increase. Oh, subject dear to my heart, something I love doing. At its simplest, you can take a 3-frame nuke off with a queen cell, preferably a sealed cell, because, well, that cell is open. So from the hatching of the egg to the sealing of the cell, there's 150 feeding visits an hour, right? If you put an open cell into a tiddly little nucleus and you haven't included a lot of house bees, the bees can't feed that cell to the standard that you'd want. So use a sealed cell, because the full-size colony have got the girl power to do the feeding properly. And I would make up your nucleus with a frame of stores, 2 or 3 frames of brood with as many house bees on them as possible, and a sealed cell, and a little feeder possibly to dummy them up. Pardon me, a frame feeder to dummy them up, a little drop of feed. Plug the nucleus with some grass, set it where you like in the apiary, and when the bees have managed to get when the grass is wilted and the bees have managed to get out, they will orientate on that spot. So you can make up a nucleus like this and keep it in the same apiary perfectly simply. How do you ensure that you've got as many house bees as possible on your frames? This is where your plant sprayer has a dual life. It can become part of your apiary equipment. However, I would suggest that you invest in a plant sprayer for beekeeping purposes, because guess what? You don't want to be spraying your house plants and getting all propolised, do you? See, our friend Propolis keeps arriving on the situation. So if you take your frame up and out and either get somebody to hold it for you, or if your hand's strong enough, hold it by one corner, good mist, both sides. You've wet the bees temporarily and they will stick to that frame. Pop it into your nuke box. Obviously, there is a risk of taking the queen as well. So if you want to be absolutely 100% sure that you're not going to do that, it does pay to find a queen in the first place. Stick her in a matchbox, or make sure that she's off to one side where she's not going to get caught up in what you're doing. You can take off a nucleus and add a mated queen, but the mated queen needs to be a mated laying queen, right? Not a queen that's just arrived in a travel cage and she's been off the lay for a few days. That way leads to trouble. The bees always expect to find what they expect to find, right? If there's queen cells in the colony and you move a nucleus off, the bees are perfectly happy because you have queen cells. If there is a virgin running about in the colony, a nucleus would expect to find a virgin. A right queen cell you will get away with, but it wants to be hatching fairly soon. It has to be as well, it's best to be, shall I say, as close to what the bees have left behind. You can also make increase as part of your swarm control. And this is where it gets delightfully simple. you have a colony that is, let's say, has a shed load of queen cells. You can split that colony into 3 or 5, and in one of those boxes, you will have the queen. So a week down the line, you can go back, have a quick look. Right, this one's got the queen, so that's okay. You know what's going on there. The other ones, you can allow the virgins to hatch out, fly and mate, and at that point, you can make further decisions. You could scrap all of them, bar one, unite back together. You could take 2 nukes, unite the others back together. It's your call. But that is the simplest way of dealing with a swarm situation. Or you can also, as part of your demery, where you've got your brood box with the bulk of the brood in it on top of the colony, you can manufacture a little floor that has queen excluder in it, so the bees could communicate up and down. And as part of that little floor, you have an entrance, and you leave 1 queen cell up top. She flies and mates. You've got a queen laying downstairs. You've got a queen laying upstairs, and you can then decide what you want to do. Your call. Lots and lots and lots of variations on the theme, probably more than you can shake a stick at, quite literally. Virtually finally, by all means, amuse yourselves with the American and the other videos, but keep closely in mind that they are not in a maritime climate. We are. The two have got no relationship virtually whatsoever. I can't emphasize this enough. I've told you more than once. Keep it in mind. And finally, when you get some experience, start a colony with 1 frame of bees, shook in, and a queen cell, and then mail me how heavy it gets in 13 weeks. I'll bet the farm on it, all of it, that it'll come nowhere near 112 pounds, which is what that guy in Ontario achieves. And that's the difference, people, between what happens in warm, sunny, continental climates and our miserable, cold, wet dose of realism here in Scotland. Now then, that's me. I'm going to unmute. We'll take questions if there are any. And if not, that's all she wrote. Now I need to find me bitty for the... David, hang on a minute. Man, like a foot in a drain pipe. Just a minute now. Right, David, go for it.
It was really just to follow up on something you were talking about earlier on. You were talking about the guards in the front of the hive and the bees needing an 8mm gap. Is that the absolute minimum that they can get through?
Is that the minimum they can get through? Yes.
Right. So, for example, this is a Lego Technics brick, and the hole in the middle is, it's just a hair under 5mm, so they wouldn't get through that.
No, but neither would your bee.
That was what I was asking. So a bee wouldn't get through that. Just too narrow.
Yes, it's. I mean, the bee is the size the bee is, and the bee needs 8mm.
Aye.
Your mussy needs more than 8mm, and if it's a slot, it will take full advantage.
Aye, that's fine.
Right.
I was just because I've got loads of these lying around.
No,
I thought if I could use that to make a...
No, 8mm bit and a bit of plywood would make you a mouse guard. Cheap as chips.
Aye, fair enough. Just when I put my hand up earlier on, it was when you were talking about planting stuff. I was in Home Bargains earlier, and they're doing those boxes. You'll probably laugh at that. They're doing the boxes of bee and butterfly mix. And it's got all different types of flowers in it. Are they any good?
I don't know. When we had the guest house, we had a dreadful slope at the back of the garden. It was 60 degrees. And I used to weed that by putting a ladder up and standing on the ladder. That's how steep it was, right? And we sowed that, I think, 3 times in total with a wildflower mix that was guaranteed to be absolutely magical. And not a blasted flower appeared, not one. And after all that work, as you can imagine, standing on a ladder after a while, I get sore. And I was so annoyed, really was. So pay your money, take your choice.
Well, you know, at £3.50, I'm not gonna shed any tears if it doesn't work.
Right.
Smashing. Thank you.
Good luck. Anybody else? Yes.
Can I ask some questions, if that's okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
Just when you were saying, David, about your experience, just to pick up on that, I got a present, and do you know those things you get them? They're bags of bee bombs. They're like, I don't know what they are, bits of clay with seeds in them. Well, we've got a box and an allotment, and I thought, oh well, whatever it says, if you throw them in and water them, you don't even have to dig them into the soil. And I have to say, they were absolutely stunning. They were beautiful.
Yeah.
Poppies, cornflower, the whole lot. They came up beautifully, and it was a bag of bee bombs. Anyway, that wasn't my question. My questions for you, Pete, are: when do you take the mouse guard off?
About now.
Now, right, okay.
The reason being that, as per the photograph I put up, I don't know if you saw it, of the bee collecting pollen this morning.
Yes, I did.
Right. By forcing the bees to go back through the mouse guard, especially now, there's a risk of the bees losing quite a lot of that pollen.
Ah, right, okay.
And secondly, the mouse guards are on for when the bees are tightly clustered and they're really not that able to defend themselves from vermin. But now they're far more active, they're not in a cluster, and moosey beware. Right,
okay, that's fine. My next question was, which I can probably look up, but I'm quite keen on the Swinty hives. But I phoned the supplier, beginning with T, that a lot of us use, and they don't stock them at all.
No, that's right, they don't.
Right.
Big T, in their infinite wisdom, and I tweaked a woman about this, and she turned out to be one of the board of directors.
Right.
But anyway, I tweaked her about it, and she said, "No, we're not ever going to stop polystyrene."
Oh, right.
Thought,
Okay.
This was at a point where Denmark was 95% poly. Sweden and Norway were somewhere about 90% poly. I thought, the writing's kind of on the wall here. But anyway, their choice. They sell queen mating nukes. They don't sell polystyrene. And the person that you need to speak to is C. Wayne Jones. Failing that, phone Swinty themselves in Denmark, and they'll be more than happy to help you.
Okay, that's
and
great.
They've got perfect English, by the way.
Oh, that's great. I've got 2 other questions. One was about I went out just to see whether there was any bees flying in and out the other day, and to make sure after the wind they were still upright, right? But I didn't open them, despite I'm very keen to open them and make sure they're still there. But anyway, the person that I was with, who's a mentor, said to me, put your hand on the side of your nook and tell me where your bees are, right? And I actually I've got a polystyrene nook, and I've got a wooden hive, because I wanted my first hive to be wooden. But anyway, I'm going to buy something polystyrene. But when I put my hand on the nook, actually I could feel, for some bizarre reason, they were all in one corner. Why would that be in a nook? Why are they not in the middle of it where it would be warmest? Polystyrene nook. I could feel the heat coming out of one corner.
Think what you've just said.
I mean,
No, listen. They're in a polystyrene nuke, right?
But is it the same heat all the way around then? It doesn't matter where they are?
No.
Right.
No. where's the warmest place going to be in a polystyrene nuke?
I
The
don't know. I would have
warmest
thought
place.
I would have thought in the centre of it. Right.
In the corner.
Right.
In the corner. Why? It's got two faces to be cozy against.
Ah, right. Right.
If they're in the middle, they've only got the heat above. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Okay.
If you have a look at a poly overwintering and a timber box overwintering, the timber box, and the same applies actually to swarms, the timber box will have the bees in the middle, as far away from that cold outside wall as the bees can get. The poly will be hard against the polystyrene. It's the warmest place they can be.
Okay.
And there's
So,
the difference.
right, okay, so that was reassuring that they were still there, because I never actually saw any bees coming in and out. I mean, it was only 8 degrees, so I wasn't really expecting them to be coming in and out, but it was reassuring to actually feel that they were in that corner all huddled together. Anyway, one last thing, to go to the baker's fondant, how long can you store the baker's fondant in one of these big polystyrene tubs? Should I put thymol in it?
No.
And no, and also when you're putting the baker's fondant, which is kept in this tub in the garage, it's rock solid when you take it back out. Should I heat it up in the microwave before I use it in the hive?
No, no damage it. What sort of fondant is you're getting in a tub?
Well, it's baker's fondant from one of the local bakers. It just looks like, I don't know what it is, but is it? She just said it was baker's fondant.
Is it not in a cardboard box inside a blue plastic wrapping?
No, it's bits of, I don't know whether it's left over from making cakes or what it is really.
What weight is it?
I don't know, I didn't weigh it. It's just in big chunks of what looked like to me like white icing or something. I don't know what
Right,
it is
okay. It
exactly.
sounds like, yeah, it sounds like you're getting offcuts.
Right.
When I buy my fondant, it comes in a 12.5 kilo pack, which is a rectangle about 4 inches
Oh,
thick.
I've got some of that I've bought as well, but this is just, I
Right.
know what to do with that. You just open the polystyrene thing, put it on the top
Yes.
frames, top of the
Yeah.
frames. I've done that.
Yeah.
But the baker's fondant that she's given me out the baker's, I mean, it's rock solid when you take it out.
Yes, it's dried out. I would
Right.
bin it. Either bin it or make it into syrup.
Right, okay,
All you need
okay.
to do is warm
What,
some
just
water
melt
in a
it?
big
Right.
pan, add it into that and stir it.
Right, okay. Okay, that's what I'll do then. Right, that's fine. Thanks for that then. That's me.
Right, no bother. Right, Michael's asked about Facilia, and I believe it's possible to get some honey off that. So I've got no experience of it myself, but it does ring a vague bell. Okay, anybody else?
Yes, please.
Go on, Shona.
Yeah, I've got a national timber hive. When would you suggest taking the polystyrene roof protect? You know, the insulation.
Never.
Just leave it in.
Always.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Right, Shona, go onto my site and read Mobus on wintering.
I did. Yeah, I did.
Right. Mobus coupled top insulation with bottom ventilation.
Yeah, I've got the bottom open floor.
Right. The two stay together.
Okay.
They work together.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how many layers of polystyrene? I mean, it's only an inch or so, 2 inches maybe at the most. Just
the more the better, really.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I mean, it all depends on the depth of your roof. Most of the roofs are about 4 inches.
Yeah,
so a 2-inch chunk is fine.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Yep.
Yep.
Any more for any more?
Yeah. I've got a few sheets of Kingspan in the loft. I don't know if you're familiar with Kingspan. It's like the expanded insulation. Yeah. It's got like aluminium foil on either side.
Yeah.
Could that be used to manufacture a hive?
No, the bees will tunnel into it. What you can do is, if depends about time you're willing to spend on it, you could line it with like 6mm plywood. So the bees have got a hard surface inside the hive and the insulation on the outside. But to make an actual hive out of it, no, the bees will just burrow into it.
Even though it's got the aluminium sheet on it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay then, folks, that's all she wrote. It's been enjoyable. I hope you've learned something, and we have so far one beekeeping course that will be taken off. I'll mail you and let you know what the dates are. If any of you want to come down to the Borders for a day, you are more than welcome, and look forward to seeing you in the future.
Okay, thank you very
Absolute
much.
pleasure, Pete.
Any-
Thank you very much.
Any
Thanks so
more
much, Pete.
questions, just before we wrap this up totally, any more questions, I'll leave the email address open.
Okay.
But do Google before you mail me.
I was the one that asked about the kosher and the halal. It was really more for a talking point.
No
I already had the
names,
answers.
no pack drill. Right then.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
All the
Bye-bye.
best.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Take care, everybody.